Hello everyone. In this video we're continuing with our abilities toolbar. We'll be adding a new ability and we'll be able to switch between active abilities in our toolbar. Make sure you've seen part 1, otherwise this won't make a lot of sense. In order to create this we will need Unity, Game Creator and the Stats module. Before we start, I would like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for the amazing support. This scene will also be made available on Patreon. So I quickly want to show what we're actually doing here. So in the last tutorial we set up our abilities to be linked by default to one of the abilities in this list. Now the big change is that we no longer link to one of those directly, we have them in a list variable, and once we select a new ability here and we go back, it will simply change the icon and put a different item to be selected in the list variable. So once we activate this, we'll basically have a different activated ability, and that's really how it works. Now the invisible I set up is really basic. It's just a simple trick in order for them to not see us, and then once the power is turned off they can see us again. So that's it really. So let's set this up. So this is the scene we set up in our last video. In order to do this you will need to have watched that video, otherwise none of this will make any sense. So please watch that if you haven't already, and let's get started. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our user interface. Now I'll be using my existing one. Obviously you can use any pause menu you have, and let's get started. So in my character content I have the color picker, etc. For now I'm just going to remove those things. There we go. And yeah, we have this. Let's actually rename this to title, content, and let's change the text to something more fitting. Cool. Not a great text, but you know, it's something, right? So going to duplicate this one. Let's rename it to, I'm not really sure why I have agility as a name for the category. I'm pretty sure it's not actually agility, but I'll change it to something more fitting if you have a better name. So let's make this a bit bigger, 24, maybe that's not big enough, 30, there we go. And we have agility. Cool. So this is the first step. Now what we're going to do is let's rename this as well, just to keep everything fitting. And we're going to create a button. Sorry about that. Agility, Game Creator, UI, and button. There we go. So let's make sure this is part of agility. Remove the text, and I'm going to resize this button to about the same, and this is the size we used as well for the buttons in the toolbar, so I'm just going to use the same size, and that's it. I'm going to use the same button as well, so let's just call it circle, but in this case I'm just going to keep it white, and obviously change this to whatever color you like. Doesn't really matter all that much. Now going to have my player UI visible as well, because I do want to have a look at these abilities. So this was my blast, shield, and slow motion. So slow motion is the category we're going to change. So let's have a look. I'm going to duplicate that one. Let's call it invisible. And we need an icon for that. So I have a really basic icon, invisible, and I'm simply going to drag that in. Now by duplicating it, you'll make sure it copies over the correct sizes and the correct color as well, so it will just fit. And we're going to deactivate it. As by default, I'm going to have slow motion visible. So I'm going to grab all of these icons, going to duplicate them. I'm going to drag them in here. Cool, let's drag them here. And I'm going to start off with slow motion, so that needs to be the first button. Going to drag invisible below it, same category. And for now I'm just going to disable these so they're not visible, and we'll do that after. So we have the first icon ready, first button ready, but we need some actions. So I'm going to start off with set active, and I'm going to activate slow motion. Now by default this will be active, but if you switch to invisible and then want to switch back, we need to make sure that it gets selected as well. So that's why we're doing this. And invisible, the correct one, invisible needs to be inactive. So that's how it will be by default anyway. You just need to make sure it works. Let's call this slow motion button. There we go. Going to keep the colors. I'm not changing anything here for now. And that's really it. And we're going to add one more step. And that's graphic color. Going to drag in our slow motion here and set it to white. And now that we have that, I'm going to duplicate this one. Call it invisible button. Perfect. And we're going to drag that down a bit. Let's remove invisible from this one, and let's keep it as the only active one here. And let's drag it in. Perfect. So quite clear, slow motion, invisible. Might be my screen, but it looks like they're not the same color, but I could be wrong here. Yeah, it's same color, well, just my screen then. Cool, so we have invisible and slow motion. Now these actions need one more step, and that is setting our invisible button to a different color, which kind of shows an inactive color. Going to do it like this. And once we select this button, we need the opposite. So we need to activate invisible, deactivate slow motion, the icons anyway. And invisible needs to be white, that's correct. Let's make sure we keep the same color as well for consistency. Let's copy that one over. And we just need to switch these around, so this will be slow motion. So a really simple step in order to make sure that once we press these buttons, these icons will change and these colors will change, and that's it really. We're not doing all that much other than that. Now the normal color needs to be set to white, and by default this needs to appear white once we start the game, and this needs to be that grayish color we set up here. So easy step to do that is simply add a trigger here. On start, I'm going to just drag the action in here. And I'm pretty sure we can just copy that over. Where is it? There we go. And voila, all done. Now the reason I'm not changing that by default is because it will change the way the gradient works really, so this is an easier option really. So that's agility, perfect. Now let's duplicate agility, let's call it defense. There we go. Now for now I only have one button, so I'm simply going to deactivate this one, but I'm sure you'll want to set up multiple powers anyway. And I'm just going to remove these actions for now. So we're not doing anything else except for setting that up, and we need our shield icon. So let's call this shield button. There we go. Remove our slow motion, and we're activating our shield. This one always bugs me a bit, doesn't look centered. There we go. So that's defense for now. You still have the second button, but for now we're not making it visible because we're not setting it up. And this is also what we're going to be duplicating, sorry. As for offense, it will be the same. And we'll need that blast image in it. There we go. I'm going to drag that in the middle. Let's call this blast button. And that's it. They're not really doing anything else than that. Now let's just make sure these actions are correct. So it's activating slow motion, which is obviously not what it should be doing. It should be activating blast. The color it's setting is the correct one. That's one of the advantages of just duplicating. And we need to make sure the same happens with our shield. And let's make sure our shield activates the shield icon, and that's it. So it doesn't really change anything for these two because we don't have any other options. So pressing these won't have any effect. But the nice thing is you have these base actions already set up, and if you're going to add other abilities, it will just save you some time. So that's it for now when it comes to our buttons. So let's give this a go. Let's just make sure it all works. Cool. I'm going to open up our menu here. I'm going to select invisible. As you can see by default, when starting it was a different color. Activating invisible, and our invisible icon is visible here. So obviously it's still setting using our slow motion, so once we activate it, it will still be slow motion that's activating because we didn't set up any other powers yet, but at least the icon work and selecting them all works. So let's head over to our player for now. Let's just collapse these all. We'll need them in a bit, but let's go to our player, and we need to set up a new ability. So I'm going to create an empty, going to call it invisible. I'm adding the audio source just for you to know that, if you want to have a VFX or audio FX, however you want to call that, file that plays once you activate the power, just drop it in here and it will play on awake. So a really simple step. Now It's important to not confuse this with invincible. It's invisible, so we're just going to, let's add our trigger. Now I'm going to be adding a set of actions here and conditions. Now these conditions, I'm going to remove them, because what we're going to do is we're going to actually just copy over those conditions from our slow motion ability we set up last time. So that was the drain mana. We'll need to adjust these a bit, obviously, these actions, but it will save some time. So drain mana, there we go. And we need to set up actions. So what is it actually doing when we're invisible? And we're changing materials. So there we go, not animate. There we go, material. I created a really basic material here. So all it's really doing is, you know, it's transparent. The color is set to really, 9. And we have some metallic and smoothness going on just to make sure we're actually reflecting some light. So, you know, as a player, you can still actually see the character, but it gives this invisible feeling. So if you'd truly be invisible, it would be really difficult to play the game, obviously. So let's drag that in. I'm going to duplicate this because our character has 2 parts in the body. So he has the body part and he has the joints. So both of these need to be set as invisible. And our invisible will have a capsule as well. There we go. Around the player. And let's remove the meshes, and that's it. Now this is a really simple trick. There's some downsides to this as well, obviously, but the nice thing here is that because we have a collision around our player, the enemy's perception won't work and they won't actually see us. It really is that simple. Now this is not a tutorial on a complex and correct setup of a invisibility power. You definitely need to expand on this for it to be a lot more realistic for your game, but right now it does exactly what it says. We're invisible, and that's it. Now this capsule is part of invisible, so the moment invisible is active, our capsule is active. That's simple. Now this trigger of unstart needs to be on enable, otherwise it won't work repeatedly. And yeah, that's really it. Now let's make sure this drain mana actually works. So I'm going to keep the same condition, same drainage. Now the set active of the ability is the correct one because we're keeping the same category, so we're still good there. Drain mana is still the correct one. It's calling as well, so we're good there as well. But then set inactive object slow motion and on the else, and that needs to become invisible. Still the correct active, and we have change timescale and change player run speed. Now those are not correct because we need to correct our material, so let's make sure we do that as well. So here, let's just copy these over, it's just easier. And there we go. So these are the actions, and we need to select the correct material again, and in my case it was just white and black. And black for the joints. Now let's just see if this actually works in our game before we set it up with the actual toolbar, and just make sure the ability is actually functional. So when we turn this on, it will drain correctly, so we're good there. It resets as well, and yeah, at least that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, just in play mode, I'm going to remove the condition for drain mana, because I just want to see if we're actually, if the power is actually functional when we're near enemies. And yeah, no one can actually spot us, no one can see us. We're all good here. So the ability is functional. Now, like I said, there are definitely some downsides to doing it like this, and you'll be able to overcome them. But I would make, you know, invisibility a bit more complex in the way it functions. So, but at least it's a functional power and it works. So we're good there. Now let's head over to our abilities category. So this is what we set up last time. So we have all of our abilities. Now we're tying this to, God, I can't remember. Let me actually check. There we go. We're tying it to numpad 6 or keypad 6. And when we open up these conditions, you will see that it will turn on slow motion and it will turn off slow motion. And that's what we're going to change here. So we're going to change this to a list variable. We didn't create that one yet, but we're going to. And we're going to change it to index 0. And we're doing the exact same here. Index 0. So the functionality will remain the same, and that's all good. We don't really need to change anything else here. So let's go ahead and create our list variable. Going to keep that inside of keypad 6 as well, just to make it clear. So agility list, however you want to call it. They need to be game objects because those are the ones we're actually activating here. So if we go to our player, go to our abilities, we're going to by default drag in slow motion because that's the default power that is set up. Now if you don't have any power set up by the start of in the start of your game, just don't have anything in here. You know, really that simple. So by default we have slow motion, so we need to drag in slow motion as the default ability. And what we're going to do in our pause menu, so we're going a bit back and forth here, but that's important. Character and then our agility. So this is the advantage of actually naming everything correctly. You won't actually have to turn on UI, you can just find it like this. So once we press slow motion, we need to add it to a variable list. So add to list variable, it's going to be the first, and we're dragging it to agility list. There we go. It's going to be the first one, that's correct. And we're dragging in, where are you? We're dragging in slow motion. Perfect. I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to paste it on the invisible button. And instead of slow motion, we're adding invisible. And I need to make sure we select the correct one. There we go. And we drag invisible there. Cool. Now, if we look at keypad 6, so what are we actually doing here? So we are relying on this ready. That all remains the same because we're still using keypad 6, so nothing has to change here. We're adding the agility list. So let's make sure that's actually dragged in here to both of these. Ready. We cancel actions. Now the important thing is what actions are we canceling? And that's drain mana for slow motion. Now one easy trick here No, that will not be an easy trick actually. So let's actually duplicate that, and let's make sure we select the same one in the drain mana for invisible. We have change time scale and we have set run speed. So we do need to add those steps as well, and we find them here. So I'm going to just copy it over once so I don't have to go back and forth. And let's duplicate those, and we need black in here, and this was the body, so we need the joints. So those are a couple of extra steps. Now yes, both change time and both slow motion cancelling and invisibility cancelling happens at the same time, and that's not a problem. That's how it should be, so that's a good thing. And in theory, that's literally all we have to do. So I'm sure I forgot something, so let's actually give this a go and collapse all of this because it's a bit messy, and see how this all plays out. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to test if our default slow motion still works. And as you can see, that still works. Great. It still turns off as well, quite important. Now we're setting invisibility. Now we already know the icons work completely fine, so that's not really the issue. And we're going to activate invisibility. And we're invisible, and that's it. I'm going to wait just a tiny bit just to make sure we can actually cancel it appropriately as well. And cancel, and that all works as well. And now let's make sure we can switch back. And that's it. That's literally it. So yeah, really cool. And I know we only set up one ability here, so we only set up the agility category, and we have invisibility and slow motion, but you can literally just replicate those steps and add the biggest list of abilities you want. So the goal here was to be able to be a bit flexible with what we can do, and if you want to add 1 million abilities, it's an exaggeration, but if you want to add a lot of abilities, you definitely can, and you can just go crazy with the amount you want to set up. So yeah, really, really cool. So hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.